who am I? Well, I'm Chris Stewart. What am I? I am. I'm MD of Minding Minds. We are a mental health first aid instructor, instructing company. So our mission is to get into corporates and to give them, give some of their guys the tools to be able to help to look after the mental health within the companies. And the great, the great thing was, before all of this started, was that we did have a lot of companies who were really enthused about this, because they're going to understand that actually we need people's physical health to be good, so we also need their mental health to be good. So a bit about me. Yeah, bit about me.
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay, a bit about me. So I'm in recovery. I got sober in 2005 after, I guess, probably 20 years in hindsight of I would say problematic drinking, moving into drastic and life-threatening drinking. And as we were saying, I was stuck in that old kind of internal lie of addiction that said, you can't change this. It's always going to be like this. It always has been like this. You're not worth it, so why bother? But got into recovery in 2005, and very quickly, with the support of the fellowship, got myself back into kind of meaningful work after thinking, you're 40 with no real worker in a hostel. I can remember thinking that would be just amazing. But as you know, recovery is kind of better than that, and took me to different and kind of more exciting places. I was lucky enough to work with Turning Point and the NHS to set up the first alcohol-specific treatment program for West Berkshire, to open that, and that's now up and running. But then when I came back in 2017, I saw the opportunity to work in mental health, which is close to my heart. I drank on top of a misdiagnosis of bipolar disorder, and I drank on that for 20 years. And when I got sober, so the drinking went away, but I kind of got sober and went, oh my God, I've still got bad mental health. So, I've been on a journey for the past 15 years, coming to a kind of level of acceptance and treatment for my own mental health. So it seemed perfect to go and do this stuff. So there's a very long-winded introduction to me.
No, it's fabulous. I really appreciate you giving us that information, because as we've talked about in the past, stopping drinking and drug taking is really just the beginning of the journey.
Absolutely.
And often, when you take the drink and the drugs away, or the dysfunctional behaviour, you're left with underlying issues as to the reasons why some people may have drank or used drugs in the first place. For me, it was anxiety. So I used to suffer a lot with anxiety as a little girl, very anxious little girl, scared. I wasn't sure what I was scared of, but there was never really an arena to discuss fear, because growing up in a Mancunian working class home, nobody did fear or tears. So I found drink primarily, and that was what sort of anaesthetised that feeling for a little while. So tell us a little bit more. I'm really interested in mental well-being, because obviously, like you, I also work in the corporate sector, so I work one-to-one mainly with high-functioning addicts. And I get brought in usually to work quite closely for an intense period with a director, CEO, whoever's got the problem, and try and integrate them into a recovery process. And just,
I mean, that's interesting. I think it's really misunderstood that I heard somebody describe kind of mental health and addiction as an equal opportunities mongrel, in the fact that it can affect anybody at any level. And actually, the higher up the ladder you are, the more stresses that you're dealing with. And actually, I, like you, have worked with many people at kind of board level who have got drug and alcohol problems and also struggling with kind of depression. And you know, I really relate to the anxiety as a kid, and for me is to drink on top,
Yeah.
because it's socially acceptable. It's wine o'clock. I belong to so you know, a lot of, like we all do, but HR groups and exec groups and whatever on Facebook. And you know, during that 3-week period where it was all madness going off with COVID, all I was seeing at 5 o'clock were pictures of G&T and wine and the rest of it. And I'm not here to demonize drink, but it's just that people need to recognize that actually, you know, it's a really, really slippery slope.
Yeah.
And I think coming out the other side of this, we're going to have a lot of trouble. Going back to what you were saying initially about the issues of stress and anxiety and mental health within, you know, the workplace and within that upper echelon. I mean, just to explain the idea of mental health first aid itself, it started in 2000 back in Australia. They come up with some great ideas, the Aussies, and was basically a lady who worked in the healthcare system, who came back and said, look, I keep seeing people getting saved from cardiac arrest, that their, you know, major bleeds have been staunched and people are bandaged properly and the rest of it. Why aren't we doing this with mental health? So the idea of mental health first aid was kind of brought up. Companies like EY, Ernst and Young, you know, they're up to kind of training 1 in 10 of their workforce, because they've recognized that it's not just the right thing to do. Yes, we should be looking after our staff, but it's the smart thing to do too. You know, we work very closely with Yo Sushi, and they dropped their absenteeism rate by 25% and stopped their staff churn by 9%. Now that last figure, if you put that in front of an exec board, suddenly their ears prick up, because it's costing them 20 grand a pop to replace these people.
Yeah.
So to go back to but I think I mean, it's a kind of crazy notion that you can't have good health if you haven't got good mental health. You can be physically fit and depressed, and if you're depressed and physically fit, you're not well. And this idea that we somehow these two things need to be separate, to me is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we need to be understanding that mental health is integral to our whole being. And that's kind of the mission that we're on, is to be able to open up the conversations, give people some of the tools that are there. We're not turning people into clinicians. What we're turning people into is somebody who's got the information and the ability to have a conversation with somebody that says, this is okay, we know where to signpost you to, and we'll hold your hand while we do that. And it's just opening that up, you know, and going back to mental health and drug and alcohol use, I think they're conjoined twins. You know, there are some people who get sober and everything's kind of normal mental health wise, but in my experience, just about, you know, but the majority of people still have underlying issues that they drank on top of, or are actually caused by the drinking itself. You know, we know that prolonged alcohol use is going to increase your anxiety levels and also your ability to cope with stress, you know. So yeah, I mean, that's, to me, is the kind of the mission of where we're at, is to make it easier to talk about it and understand that people have it and people get well. You know, I've got bipolar is one of the more serious diagnoses of mental health first aid, of mental health. You know, but I used to live in a night shelter in Bath, and I ended up living in Barbados. And that's not here to say, wow, look at Chris. It's about going, anything is possible, you know?
Yeah. Everything is possible. And I think we, as people in recovery, are in with a great advantage in knowing that actually the principles that we apply to our life are what make our life more meaningful and more purpose-led and you know, more generous hearted. And it's almost like we have that insight once you get into recovery and you apply those principles to your life. And I think that's the beautiful thing about mental health first aid is I did the training myself some years ago when it first came out in the UK, and to be honest, it makes perfect sense. It's like 1 in 4, and these are the figures that we know of, so these are the ones that actually filled the questionnaire in. 1 in 4 of us is affected by it, or within our close circle. Those are the figures that we're aware of. So the reality is going to be a lot more than that, I reckon.
Absolutely, because we, you know, we're trying to measure something that people don't want to talk about. You know, like you say, it's 1 in 4 of the general population, 1 in 6 of the working of the workforce in theory. So whether that's people who are unable to, you know, that's lower because there's some people who are unable to work because of it, or it's affecting either younger or older people, you know. But we also, you know, there's some shameful figures in there as well that you know, suicide is the biggest killer of males under the age of 45.
I know.
I mean, that's a shocking statistic. If you turn around and say, you know, and you're like, oh my God, you know what, bigger than car crashes? Yeah, like 5 times bigger than car crashes every year.
And way bigger than accidents in the workplace. So, you know, I think, I don't know if it's gonna be or if it's planned to be, but I personally think mental well-being in the workplace, if it's delivered by, you know, your good self or some other trainer, or it's essential. It's like, you know, we're there with the machines just in case somebody has a heart attack. I think personally as well, I think the people that are best placed to become mental health champions are people with a lived experience. You know, we know that. We know that.
Absolutely. And you know, we specifically aim to employ people who have experience of mental health themselves, and that's not necessarily like me suffering with a condition myself, but it's also important to have people on board who understand what it's like to live with somebody who's suffering with depression or stress or anxiety, because as we now and it's the same with mental health. You know, you've got the one person in the middle that's suffering with it, but then you've got the 10 people around them that are suffering with them, if you like, feeling powerless and not understanding what they can and what they can't do and what they should be feeling
in recovery. And you know, it was critical to my own personal journey. But what would you say? I mean, there was lots and lots of things that I had to change living with an alcoholic. I didn't know, none of them. I thought my behaviour as a loving partner was made perfect sense, and it was only when I started getting some support, proper support from people with a lived experience of helping family members get well, did I realise that actually everything that I was doing was wrong. You know, so would you say that that's very similar with mental health?
Yeah, I think what the most important precept for both is an understanding that you are powerless over the other person, and you are powerless over the illness, and that you cannot wake up in the morning going, I'm going to go and fix them, but what am I going to do today to fix them? Or second judge what might be right or bad or good, or what should I do in my day? And before you know it, for both, the illness ends up running the other person's day. It ends up running their behavior. It ends up running what they do and they don't do. And they stop looking after themselves. you know, one of the greatest things I always say to people is that, you know, there is a reason that there's an instruction on the airline card that says put your own oxygen mask on first. Yeah. Because if you're not doing that, how the hell are you going to help the other person? And that applies to, you know, that applies to this in exactly the same way. You need to look after you. And if you look after you, you stand a better chance of looking after the other people. And by all, and was to disappear. And all of a sudden, I'm left on my own drinking, unable to blame anybody else for it because there was nobody else there. Yeah. They had to withdraw for their own sanity out again and left me to it.
Yeah.
And for that, it was that kind of, I don't know, if you show, same with somebody with depression, if you show somebody the tools that are there for them to recover, if they won't go to the doctor to go and get any help, if they won't access one of the myriad of support mechanisms there are online, we are so lucky we live in this age where we can dip into, you know, depression and bipolar Zoom meetings in America. I can access, I can do whatever, you know, there's loads of stuff out there. But if the person isn't doing that, you can't make them, and you certainly shouldn't feel responsible.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there's anybody watching this and they're living with somebody who's struggling with mental health, what would be your top tips? I mean, obviously, I know you're not a doctor, and I know you're not, you know, you'd always say go to the doctors first and foremost, because that's really important. But if you were going to give, as a family member living with somebody who might be displaying mental health issues, what would be your top tips as a starting point?
So it depends on what we're talking about. I mean, if I talk a minute, say, about anxiety, I think anxiety is a very misunderstood and quite glib term that you and I say we were anxious as children. I don't know about you, but it was an all-encompassing, very debilitating experience that meant that the world for me was an incredibly scary place and very difficult to deal with. And I think anxiety,
amazing chemicals internally. I'm very creative, but we went through. It's almost like a gift that we can pay forward. But like you said, you know, I think the beginning of the journey is admitting that there is a problem. I think that's critical. A lot of people don't want to be mentally ill. It's like, no, you know, I don't want to have depression. So they think that they can just dismiss it.
Yeah. And
it's not as simple as that, is it?
Yeah, and I'll just work my way through it and pretend that it's not there. The reality is that, you know, you get full-blown depression. It's a bit like flu. You're not getting out of bed. You're not showering. You know, you're not doing your normal day-to-day tasks, and it becomes incredibly debilitating. So, you know, to catch this stuff early on, you know, to be able to say, okay, I've had a persistent low mood, you know, for at least 2 weeks now, if not more, then maybe I need to do something about it. Now, also accepting that what we're going through at the moment, you know, and one of my greatest fears at the moment is how are we going to look after the guys who are on the front line at the moment? You know, I've got a friend, if not months. At the end of this, when that stops, my greatest fear is that there isn't going to be the capacity there to be able to look after these guys. Yes. Because when that settles and the quiet comes, for me, that's the danger period. That's when we're going to start seeing PTSD. We're going to start seeing depression. We're going to start seeing anxiety, because, you know, the human body and mind isn't built to go through what these guys are going through at the moment.
And they're operating in trauma, aren't they, at the moment? They're operating on adrenaline that actually that's been created because of the awful situation that they're in. I really hope and pray that the NHS and all of these other, because it's not just the NHS, you know, it's the emergency services, it's you know, people, even in Tesco's, you know, frontline staff in Tesco's, bin men, you know, these people are dealing with on the front
Fear.
line. Yeah, and they're operating in fear.
They're operating in fear on a daily basis, whether you're stacking a shelf in Tesco's, worried about whether you're going to take it home and give it to your mum.
Yeah.
Whether you're a nurse on the front line, whether you're the ambulance driver, whether you're the girl in the nursing home. Yeah.
I know, it's awful at the moment. They don't have protective clothing. It's like unbelievable, really. It's terrifying.
To be able to support these guys afterwards, I'm just so fearful, you know, obviously having a kind of mental health mind on it all, that like you say, once the adrenaline stops, that for me is the real danger time, whether it's them picking up the booze to cope with it, whether it's slipping into depression, PTSD, or the rest of it. I did think about checking out a petition to the British Association of Counsellors to see whether we could get some people to pledge a few hours to help these people.
I think that's a really good idea. I think, or you know what, I mean, I'd be interested in you sharing as well that the Zoom meetings that you were talking about in America, you know, even if somebody just set up something like that here, you know, I mean, we're so blessed again to have recovery and the fellowships that we're involved in. I mean, they've been online for 3 weeks. We've got support day and night. You can actually go to a 12-step fellowship meeting every hour if you want.
You
know, from various fellowships. But wouldn't it be amazing if somebody thought, you know what, we need to set this up in preparation for the aftermath?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, you know, trying to find a way that we can support we know what's coming, so let's try and find, you know, a safety net for them that's able to catch as many as possible the other side of it. I think it's a great idea. So maybe we ought to go away, have a think about how we could do something, and maybe try and get something together. I think it would be brilliant.
Put our heads together. And do you know what I've discovered in this period? I mean, I've known this for a long time. Social innovation is going to be absolutely paramount during this time, but after this time too. And when I say social innovation, I mean people thinking outside the box.
You
know, I've been acting productively in my work. You know, I mean, I've set up a helpline service, an online Zoom meetings, face-to-face Zoom meetings. You know, all of these things I've never offered before, but now it's needed more than ever. And social innovation afterwards is going to be critical, because there's going to be so many people who have lost their jobs, who do need to help themselves, but also wouldn't it be great if we could, you know, use social innovation as a way to give people a purpose-led career, you know, where they could actually go, what, all of this experience that we've been through won't go to waste then. I think that if we use this experience properly and this situation, that some amazing things can come from it. I really do believe that in my heart. I really do believe.
It's really funny you say that. I mean, you know, once I'd got over the initial, you know, we had a massively full order book for the rest of this year, and you know, after 2 years of building the company, it was looking at. Once I'd got over the fact that all of that had disappeared, like you, I am a great believer that, you know, for anything to happen, you need a vacuum first. Yeah, you need a void for something to come out of it. And it feels like the whole country's been given space, to look at itself, to be with its family, to reevaluate. I think just the whole world, let alone this country. And out of this, I think really good stuff will come. And I'm not minimizing the fears of what people are going through or the struggles or the rest of it, but there's got to be that hope that, you know what, something's going to come good out of this.
Yeah, you know? It can only be that. I mean, there's been some awful situations, some terribly sad losses of life, and but from it, I mean, I've been apart from the work that I do in the corporate sector, I run a project in the community which is an introduction an introduction to social enterprise. So
Right.
I've been helping people for the last 7 years in recovery. I offer people in recovery a free place on my program, where I teach them about setting up social enterprises, so socially innovative businesses.
Yeah.
And I know that people with a lived experience of change at the heart of any business is like a living, beating heart. It's like it's the lifeblood that can run through it, and it's so attractive, and it offers not just attraction to people who may need that support, but also or employment, but also it destigmatizes all of the things that,
yeah.
you know, it's so important, not just recovery from substance misuse, but, you know, recovery from mental health. For us to see that actually people can do some amazing things and set up some amazing creations from that journey.
I mean, at the end of it, so the full 2-day course of the mental health first aider course, you know, I deliver a course and I deliver it as a professional and we do whatever, but my closing remarks always are is that you need to understand, you know, we've looked at bipolar disorder and this and the rest of it. I said, you need to understand that recovery is probable and possible because this guy used to live in a night shelter, had bipolar, was this and the other. I do this now, my own company, I've lived in Barbados, because this message of recovery, both from mental health and from addiction, it's not going to, stuff's not going to change unless we're out there going, this is possible.
Absolutely. And people need examples, don't they? They need to see that actually, I don't know about you, but I mean, I had very stereotypical images in my head, and conveniently, of what an alcoholic addict was, you know. And for me, stereotypically, it was somebody living on a park bench, it was somebody living, you know, or in a tent, or, you know, somebody who had no family. I had very clear pictures of what that active addict look like. And the fact of the matter is since I've worked in this field, I've realized that actually, and the statistics show that is the minority of people with addiction problems, that majority of people with addiction problems are actually high functioning and still in employment.
And that was the majority of it was interesting when we moved from a drug-only treatment service where it was 80% guys, 20% women, virtually all unemployed. Once we opened the alcohol service, we looked at the figures at the end of 6 months, and it was 55% women, 90% in work, and virtually all of the 45% of the guys were in work themselves as well. So it was all, it was mainly wine o'clock drinkers that were starting at 5 p.m. as soon as they got home from school and were drinking around the clock. There were others that were kind of, drinking more, but virtually all were what, as you would say, were high functioning.
And again, my experience of volunteering in the community is that services, particularly, I don't know about anywhere else, but particularly in Brighton, weren't set up to be as inviting to the high functioning addict. It was very much aimed at marginalised groups. So I mean, even still I get calls all of the time. I don't know what people think. I think people think I run a treatment centre of some variety, which I don't. But people ring me up constantly who are high functioning, who are still in employment, just crying out for help, not got a clue where to go. You know, they say, "Oh, I've been told that I need to go to my local drug and alcohol service. I've looked at it from the outside, and it's terrifying." You know.
Exactly.
So,
a massive bar to treatment. That you're asking people to walk into a prescribing agency that's doing needle exchange and all of the rest of the stuff, and they're going, well, I'm not this. you know, and we're really stopping people. I used to do an awful lot of outreach in doctor's surgeries because it meant I could get to people, you know, without having to drag them in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with doctors, GP surgeries. I've just actually got a small pot of funding from the clinical commissioning group
Okay.
to deliver what I call Discover Recovery. So it's an early intervention group, which we invite people from all the different fellowships to come along and give testimonies as to what worked for them. And we invite people, you know, to come along with no obligation to signing up for anything, or, you know, it's about hearing a message of hope, isn't it? I mean, that's what worked for me, and we developed this this idea off the back of recovery. You know, it has to be made attractive, and it has to be, you know, the people that we invite to come along are people that the audience can relate to.
Sure.
You know, so the people that are going to the GP surgery are generally, you know, a different type of person than the ones that would access alcohol services. So there needs to be balance, doesn't there? There needs to be services and provision available for everybody.
And it's about that ability to get, you know, I don't know about you, but you know, I'd internally told myself for probably 5 years before I got into recovery that I was an alcoholic, but I actually had no idea what that meant. You know, and one of the revelations for me when I came in, I can remember chatting to one similarly high functioning guy who'd been in paid counselling for 3.5 years, and I sat down with him for half an hour, and he turned around to me and he went, "So I'm an alcoholic?" And I said, "Well, it would appear so from the way that you've answered these questions." And he was like, "Oh my God, I've just spent X amount, thousands of pounds, because I didn't understand what was wrong with me." Yeah. And for me, it's as simple as, you know, once I started drinking, I couldn't stop, you know, unless I could put the brakes on occasionally and this, that, and the other. But generalizing, if I started, I couldn't stop. And when I stayed stopped, I couldn't stop starting again, you know?
Exactly.
And it was like, oh, is it as simple as that? Yeah, that I have this stuff that goes on with my body when you know, I could never understand what I called lightweight drinkers who would have a couple and say, "I need to go home now because the wife's cooked supper." And I'm like, "But we could be on a train in an hour and going to London. What are you talking about? And this is a Tuesday night."
Yeah.
You know, I just didn't understand the concept of not taking it to the nth degree once I'd started doing it.
No, I have friends like that. And I remember when I first got sober, one of my friends who I love dearly invited me to somebody's 60th birthday, I think it was. I was really nervous about going because obviously everybody was drinking. It was a hoi polloi party, limousines and all the rest of it. I'm really nervous about going. And I remember for the whole evening, I was absolute nervous wreck. I shouldn't have gone really, because I was very early in recovery and I was really quite apprehensive. But I wanted the world to see that, you know, I'd nailed this. Yeah. So I went and tortured myself. And I remember stood with my friend all evening. And the one thing that fascinated me all night, well, I was obsessed with it all night actually, was the fact that she had a glass of red wine.
Yeah.
And she had that much in the glass, and all night she had that much in the glass. She didn't even take a sip. Mm-hmm. She didn't refill it. She just walked around with this glass, and it was like I kept looking at her, I kept thinking, I'm not going to say anything. But all I could think about was, what's wrong with this? What? And at the end of the night, I said to her, Is that the same glass that you started off with? And she said, yeah. She said, it doesn't really bother me. And I was like, you are unbelievable. Yeah. And she said,
it's weird, isn't it? But even now, you know, I'll be in a restaurant and a couple leave a table and there's a third of a bottle of wine left, and I want to call the maitre d' over to stop them. They've obviously forgotten something. I mean, it just, you know, to me that we well know that, you know, for me, once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, is that I still have that kind of internal dialogue, that a radar that picks up on booze even though it's 15 odd years since I last drank some.
Do you know, it's so interesting. I mean, I think that's healthy too. I do think that's healthy. My kids would probably beg to differ, because they think they think the work that I do, and obviously the service, because I'm of service in the community too, in the different fellowships, and also in my church community. But my kids are always rolling their eyes at me. And so yesterday I went to Sainsbury's with them. And honest to God, Chris, we walked into Sainsbury's, and as you were walking into Sainsbury's, the whole of the right side of the store, the first aisle, was ram-packed with like shelves and shelves and shelves of various types of alcohol. And I was like, oh my gosh, look at all the booze. I mean, it was positively encouraging people. Offers are on, this was on, and it wasn't just the one aisle, it was like aisles and aisles of it.
Yeah.
And I thought, what chance have people got?
Well, it's on, it's the Western world's drug of choice, alcohol, and it as we know, I think it was Professor Nutt, the guy who was the drug czar for the Labour government. He put alcohol through the same 16 criteria that we use to class other drugs in, like heroin and whatever. And he put alcohol through these same 16 criteria. And he said it came out as a class A with more social damage than heroin.
Oh gosh, for sure.
So to you don't walk into an A&E on a Friday night, and get millions of stoners in there. I'm not saying that any drugs are better or whatever. It's just to understand that the social damage from alcohol is enormous.
It is absolute. And you know something? I was talking to my friend yesterday, Denise Welsh, who we did an interview with. Yeah. And she's been, I think she's coming up for 18 years in recovery, very soon. Yeah. And she said, or it might be 8 years, I can't remember. It's one of the two, but she's a good friend. And she said, you know what? Alcohol is one of the only drugs that it's socially unacceptable not to take. So, when I first started off in recovery, I didn't tell everybody. My husband was in an acute psychiatric hospital at the time. I wasn't. It wasn't sort of like top of my list. I was like nervous wreck. Or the amounts of conversations and lies that I had to take to tell to people. Like they'd say, "What? Have a drink, Claire," and I'd be like, "No, it's okay, thanks. I'll just have water." And they'd be like, "What's wrong with you? Are you okay? Are you on antibiotics? Have you got some sort of infection?" It's like the questions people ask you.
So if I offer somebody a cigarette and they say no, I don't turn around and say, "Would you like a pipe?"
Yeah.
Cigar, maybe? A roll up? It's like, really, I don't want to drink, thank you. And this kind of foisting it on people and turning around and almost being mistrustful of people. Mind you, if anybody I knew stopped drinking when I was drinking, I didn't want to know them.
Oh, I wouldn't have
because the idea that it might well be possible or something that I ought to do, it was like, sorry, mate, you've left the reservation. You're not allowed back in.
Yeah, I wouldn't have sat next to you. In fact, I would have steered really clear of you. And I know now that actually and I did this on many occasions, because what I didn't know was that Kev, when he was in Coronation Street, he had quite a few people who were already in recovery, but they weren't open about it. So we'd go out and I'd say to them, this one lady in particular, I'd say, "Would you like a drink?" And she'd say, "No, thanks." "Oh, actually, I'll have a pint of Diet Coke." And I'd say, "Oh, have a triple vodka in it." And she'd be like, "No, I'm all right. I'll just have a pint of Diet Coke." And I'd be like, "Oh, come on, don't be so boring." And she'd say, "No." And she never said, "I'm in recovery." And I tortured this poor woman every time I saw her, because what I now know was the fact that she didn't drink actually highlighted how much I did drink.
Yeah.
And I did not want to be sat next to this woman whilst I was downing my triple vodkas and Cokes, because her and her pints of Diet Coke were just embarrassing me.
But it's all right, when you got to the bar doing the round, you always order your own first, so you can drink that while the rest are being poured, and then get another one just at the end.
There you go. You see, tricks of the alcoholic. Yeah, you always get yourself a sneaky one first.
Yeah.
Everyone else, and then by the time that's come around, you go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I used to drink half pints of wine.
Yeah.
And tell everybody it was wine and soda.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was like 2 large glasses of wine in a glass. Madness.
But we were normal. And you came, what, you did I hear you say that you came in through the family fellowship?
I came in through the family fellowship because obviously I wasn't that bad.
No, obviously
wasn't that bad. I only started drinking on a Thursday and finished on maybe a Tuesday or a Wednesday. So in my head, that was a weekend drinker. Yeah. And I never drank vodka. Oh no, yeah. No, I did, but I only drank vodka really on special occasions. But I had all these absolute like conditions in my own head. But yeah. because I was married to an alcoholic, it was a very high pedestal I put myself on, and it was a long drop, I'll tell you, when I fell off that pedestal. But sure. I used to sit pointing the finger at my poor husband, blaming the way my life had turned out.
Well, I mean, sadly enough, my first wife and my son's mum, who was a nurse, I got this stuff early and was chaotic by the time I was 30, and we split up when I was 30, and unfortunately she passed away from this because I never thought she was that much of a bad drinker. Well, she wasn't when you compare it to what I was doing at the time, but then remove me from the household and all of a sudden you're left with one alcoholic. And that's, I think, the difficulty that people have, isn't it? When a partner gets into recovery, then you've only got your own drinking to look at.
Oh, and it's terrifying. I mean, I'm so grateful that I did come in through the family fellowship.
Sure.
Because it was only through them teaching me about learning to love myself first and foremost, and really sort of drilling that in, that I actually started to care enough about myself to listen differently when I went to those meetings. Because for a long time I went to the family groups waiting for them to give me the secret how to stop Kevin drinking. And I was sit there with bated breath, and nobody ever did. Nobody ever told me anything. They just shared their own experience, strength and hope. But what happened to me was the more I went, the more encouraged I was to start loving myself. And then when you start loving yourself, you start to hear things differently. And I started to hear people talking about how their wives drinking was really, really, chaotic and this. And I started to identify with the partners that were being talked about. And I used to sit in meetings thinking, I'm sure this isn't right. I don't think I should be identifying with his wife, who's actually an alcoholic. And this little old lady I used to sit next to, she used to sit knitting. And I remember nudging her one day at the end of the meeting going, oh God, that fella again, talking about his wife, what she's like when she's drunk. He could be talking about me. And trying to make light of it, so she would laugh with me. And she didn't. She just put her knitting needles down and she looked at me and she went, how long have you been coming, Claire, to these meetings? And I went, for nearly 2 years. And she went, yeah. She said, and for nearly 2 years you've been coming and you've been blaming your husband for the way your life's turned out. She said, because he's got a drink problem. And so I said, yeah. So he's still got a drink problem. He's a pain in the backside. And she went, listen to me. She said, every time you point that finger at your husband and want to blame him for the way your life's turned out, she said, there's 3 fingers pointing at you and one at the solution. She said, you're the only one you can do anything about, and you can only do that with outside help. She said, now get your act together. She didn't actually say get your act together. She said, get your shit together. She said, if you're identifying with that man's wife, she said, that man's wife is an alcoholic. She said, you need to go to Alcoholics Anonymous and you need to go and listen. She said, because it sounds to me like you could have a problem yourself. I was like,
it's amazing, isn't it?
I did know, deep down I knew, but she was the first person I think that had ever told me the truth.
Yeah. and the first time that you'd been able to hear it as well. And that's the thing, isn't it? You know, I heard the same, you know, I first came into a fellowship when I was 30, and I hung around for 3 months, and I kind of nodded in all the right places and laughed at what I thought were the right jokes, and then ran the hell out as soon as the meeting had finished. And after 3 months feeling very well, I thought I'd kind of test the water as to the philosophy that is the first drink that does the damage. So I had a half pint of beer, and do you know what? Nothing happened. And 2 days later, when I had 2 pints, nothing happened. Yeah. And I was sure that I'd kind of cracked it. But a week later, when I went into blackout, lost my job because I'd been abusive at work, lost the house that I lived in, and ended up in a night shelter.
Yeah.
At that point, and unfortunately, that half pint cost me a decade. It cost me my 30s because I didn't fall back in through the doors until 10 years later, when I heard the same stuff, but I heard it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I heard it and I went, oh my God, what? So I just don't drink one day at a time. That's all I have to worry about. And that's that idea of a solution for any situation. You know, I've got chronic depression. How do I deal with it? I deal with it a day at a time. If I need to, I deal with it an hour at a time. Yeah. And I'm kind to myself, and I do the things that suggested, like having a routine, taking some time, doing some meditation, doing some prayer, investing in something creative. You know, why should I learn something where it's never going to go anywhere? Well, you don't know, so just do it. Yeah. Go find something new every day. We have the internet. Go find something new every day. You know, at the moment, I'm posting a new artist that I find every day, and it makes me go and look at new art every day. So I share that instead of sharing my top 10 albums, because everybody's a bit bored with ABBA revival.
I'm really keen on like sharing about the amazing champions that are emerging from this whole
that lady in New Zealand. Oh, I love her.
Oh, I've not heard of her. What's she doing?
The New Zealand Prime Minister is just an absolute. She was just incredible how she dealt with the mass shooting, and then how she's dealt with this. And I've got friends who are literally locked down in New Zealand because they had a command that came out and said, where you are is where you stay. I don't care whether you're a New Zealander or anywhere. If you're in a hotel, you're staying there until this is over. But yeah, she's running around, breastfeeding in Parliament, and just doing an amazing job, and has just turned around today and said all of the cabinet and me are taking a 20% pay cut in solidarity with you guys that are suffering today. So there are some amazing female leaders out there at the moment doing some great jobs when there aren't such good jobs being done by some male ones, not talking about countries.
No. Yeah, I know who you mean now. She is amazing. And of all the places, New Zealand is the one place that I would quite happily move to.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much influenced by the fact that she's such an amazing lady. I would love to just spend some time with her.
Yeah, just incredible.
And I'll tell you who else has really, really lit my heart up. Is it Captain Tom?
Isn't he amazing?
Oh, he's amazing. And his daughter. His daughter's amazing.
Oh, I haven't seen his daughter.
Have you not seen that? She's the one that sits next to him whenever he does an interview.
Oh, really?
But yeah, so she sort of like relays the message to him, and he's doing his 100 lengths to drive. It's raised nearly £5 million.
And he only wanted £1,000, and he keeps going, this is unbelievable.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, they're the people I want to celebrate. I know there's a lot of awfulness out there, but you know what? I just think the more inspiration we can give one another, the more hope we can give one another. And that was the whole purpose of these talks, really, was just to share the good news that, you know what, recovery is possible. And not only is recovery possible, but things beyond your wildest dreams are achievable once you're in recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, just amazing. Some of the things that we get to do, the people that we get to meet. And you know, that's not necessarily the rich and famous. It's that we get to have insight into people's lives, which is just absolutely mind-blowing, that they've done what they've done, and they've been where they've been, and they've shared what they've shared, you know. And that lives that seem to be the most worth less, or I certainly felt my life was worth less, And I now know that it's worth more. You know, it's not worth less, it's worth more. And that's purely because we get to do this stuff. We get to share hope, you know, on a daily basis. It's not just on here. We get to go and share some hope with people.
Yeah.
You know, give the general public a few of the tools that we were kind of freely given.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's our responsibility as well as, you know, we've been set free for a reason, haven't we, really?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm like you, you know, this stuff spreads into all areas of my life.
Yeah.
It's like I've been given a gift, and for me, the gift was given not for me to keep, which I did think for a number of years that it was all about me. I didn't get the memo on that one. And then some other wise person said to me, "You do realise that the reason why you've been given this gift is so you can give hope to the still suffering." And I was like, "Oh." And I do that in all areas of my life where I can. I just reach, you know, anybody who reaches out, I'm happy to support in any way, shape or form, you know. And one of my gifts is connecting people. So, you know, if somebody comes to me and I can't help them, which is generally 99.9% of the time, I can connect them to somebody who can.